Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons, where you can sign up to be a member of the Shannons Club, your local Holden certified service centre, Pace Farm the enjoyable egg, and Heron Forbes Machinery House, where you can buy online. G'day, I'm Fletch and welcome to the show. Aircraft. They have always fascinated me. I've had hundreds of flights, from some of the smallest passenger planes with propellers through to some of the largest of jets. Today, I want to take you to where I have never filmed before. I'd like to think that this episode is very special when it comes to aviation. So, it may not be bikes, it may not be cars, and it's definitely not trucks. But it is aircraft that I'm about to bring you in this week's Classic Restos on the road. Gotta love aircraft. They're big, they're loud, they consume tons of fuel, and they're capable of taking you from one side of the world to the other. And that in itself is beyond human comprehension. I'm at the HARS Aviation Museum, and it's located at Shellharbour Airport, New South Wales, Australia. HAAS stands for the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society Incorporated. It was formed in 1979 by a group of aviation enthusiasts interested in the preservation of Australian aviation history. Members here virtually traversed the Australian continent from Tasmania to Kulumburu in north-western Australia and from Cape Llewellyn to Cape York in search of aviation artefacts. These expeditions resulted in providing considerable assistance to many restorations, including many outside of the HAAS group itself. In order to achieve objectives here, HAAS recruited specialist people from within the aviation industry who were interested in the preservation of historical aircraft. Out of 480 people, there are over 70 licensed aircraft engineers covering virtually all skills recognised within the industry. In 1997, the International Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators awarded the Grand Masters Australian Award to HAAS in recognition of the outstanding restoration of the Lockheed Super Constellation. This was presented in London in December 1998 to President Mr. Robert Delahunty, OAM, on behalf of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. I happen to have Mr. Delahunty with me now. It's time for a chat. The man himself, Bob Delahunty. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks, Fletch.
That's great. It's wonderful catching up with you.
Thank you. It's wonderful catching up with you too.
Thank you. You've got some wonderful runs on the board here.
Well, we have, thanks to a lot of people helping us, from sponsors to members and to engineers and pilots and people all over the country have come together to make this work here.
What a dramatic landscape of people.
Certainly is. We go from husbands and wives to kids and grandkids and all sorts of family members who come and pitch in and help us do this, as all volunteers do.
Just tremendous. The first year of the museum open?
2007, but we've been going since 1979, collecting bits and pieces of junk from backyards, forests, junkyards in America and junkyards in the islands of the Pacific.
The Constellation, what an incredible aircraft. This is before the jumbo jet, as we know, the 747, and before the 707, and there's one right here, and it's got a beautiful story, Bob.
It certainly has. It comes from, again, junkyard story. We were over in America, my secretary's husband and I, who got on April Fool's Day 1988, the Blue Neptune you've already seen. We were getting spare parts down in Tucson, Arizona, and there was this derelict Super Connie sitting in this yard. I looked at it and I said to my secretary's husband, we need one of these for Australia. All the Qantas ones have been scrapped, and he's dug his elbow in my ribs, which I can still feel from time to time. And I said, well, it's only a Neptune with an extra couple of R3350 engines. we can do this. Well, 5 years later, in 1996, proudly flew it back into Australia.
And the flight, how did that go? Was it Hawaii, then Fiji, then Sydney?
We went from Tucson, Arizona, doing some test flying, ultimately flew up to San Francisco, which was the old Connie base back when the Connies were operating back in the 50s. Flew it from there to Hawaii, then from Hawaii to Fiji, Fiji to Sydney. 42 hours total flying time. That's how it used to be back in the 50s. This one was built in 1954, and it flew until 77 with the United States Air Force, and then it went into storage. And
What great service that was.
oh yes, all over the world, taking troops to Germany and to Vietnam and to Japan, and many other services under the Military Air Transport Command. It didn't have a lot of hours on it compared to what the Qantas ones had when they were retired, 60 or 70,000 hours they had on them. This only had 17,000 hours, so it was really good shape.
There's two things here. Firstly, she deserves to be saved, but it also makes us realise how sad it is for the ones that were never saved.
Yeah, well, this is the only one flying in the world still. All the others were either scrapped, and there's about a half a dozen of them still potentially could fly, but they're in museums, and the cost to get them now up to speed would be enormous. So we're very fortunate that our engineers, ex-Qantas guys, have all been able to keep this going. It takes a number of years to determine whether an aircraft's going to be scrapped or flown again. And the US Air Force Museum, big storage facility in Tucson, it's got about 10,000 aircraft when we were there with the Connie. And most of them are flown in, defueled, inhibited, ready to fly out again if there was a war. And this Super Constellation was part of all of that. But 17 years later, technology had passed us by, and the aircraft, apart from someone leaving some windows open and pigeons moving in, it would have been scrapped with all the other ones. So the pigeons were a difficult thing to clean out, but they were the things that saved the aircraft.
So all the pigeon poop.
Pigeon poo, yeah. The guano, because the scrappies knew that if they melted it down, and they were selling the molten ingots to Volkswagen, making engine blocks, and they didn't want to have the phosphate from the guano in the engine blocks. So they said, don't touch that, Connie, leave that one there, that's got pigeons in it.
My passion for cars began when Nana and Pop bought their new Toyota Crown. It was Nana's, really. She loved that car. We went everywhere in it.
My passion now is just the same, even though my cars are a little different.
I've still got Nana's car, couldn't part with it. And I reckon if she was here today, she'd be insured with Shannons too.
Call Shannons on 13 46 46. Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts.
When it comes to cars, there are some brands that will remain with us forever, no matter what. The Holden was always Australia's own car, held high in the hearts of many. Those lines, that chrome, the stories around them, and the people that owned them. From the classic through to the final, you can still trust in genuine Holden and AC Delco parts, available through the Holden Certified Service Network. Here we are inside Connie, a step back in time, obviously well before, and it's nice to get to this stage of life too, to be able to say that this was well before my flying days. We can appreciate what it must have been like back in the 50s to be on board such a beautiful plane such as this. And it was a rich man's game. You didn't have families flying every weekend, going up to Brisbane and down to Melbourne. And these days, when this plane was made, it was, I guess, a lot of business. And, well, you know, you flew if you had money.
Yep. Government people. And it wasn't until the Connie really in 1958 opened up the tourist side of things. In fact, in 1958, two Connies flew from Melbourne over Sydney. One went east, one went west. They went round the world and started Qantas being the first round the world airline.
Engines out there, we've got 4 of them. Just give us a rundown on their type, how much power they have.
Well, they're Curtiss-Wright R3350s. They're very similar to what powered the famous B-29 bomber during World War II. They had a lot of problems with them. They refined those engines, and ultimately the engines on this Super Constellation are the I guess, the ultimate in piston engine design. They've got 3,400 horsepower. They've got 2 speed superchargers, power recovery turbines. There's 3 of those, plus a low voltage ignition system boosted up to 70,000 volts when they get to the spark plugs. This aircraft was really cutting edge technology when they were built. Howard Hughes, the famous movie maker and aviator, he
had the Spruce Goose.
Yes,
Yep.
and he influenced Lockheed to build these aircraft for his airline, TWA, Trans World Airlines. And in doing so, it had to be pressurised. So it was the first intercontinental pressurised aircraft. Radar was ultimately introduced into it. The customer refinements went as far as gullies so that people could be fed, toilets down the back with comfort.
But the bathrooms are only a third of the size on the planes today. That's a
big one.
Yeah, it's like what you'd see off to one side of your bedroom at home.
That's it.
You know. We look in the control area and it looks military. I'm not a pilot. I take my hats off to these guys. Even today, I've got full respect for pilots. I think they do and all the aircrew, they do a wonderful job. But when you look in there, it just looks so archaic, and I don't know how they did it.
These days, you have a negative reporting system. When something goes wrong, the computer tells you. If everything's going okay, you don't know half of what's going on. In these, you had to have eyes all over and a scan of all the instrumentation and monitoring everything. The only thing that made any noise was a fire warning, and that got your attention.
Was there any analogue computer systems at all in this time?
Well, there wasn't initially, but they gradually built some into it. The autopilot, which is functioning in here, was fairly unique back in the early 50s, that you can couple it to the throttles for an auto landing if you wanted to, but they hadn't introduced that into the civilian airlines.
So
it was tested here.
The odd system, if it had a few EPROMs here and there, that would have been cutting edge for analogue technology back in the time. Imagine having a wiring problem. You consult the manual. It says, look for a white wire. So welcome to business class in Qantas, 1954. Not a bad seat in the house here, Bob.
Absolutely, it was very special because it cost you about an annual salary to be sitting here to go to London and back in 1954, if you were lucky enough to get aboard.
Tell me why the mechanics, the technicians loved these seats particularly.
Well, the big radial engines, 3,400 horsepower sitting outside this window, was something that they just loved to sit there and watch. And there's flames coming out of the power recovery turbines, and there's bits of oil coming out of them, and they can see the propellers going round, and it's very hard to get them out of this seat. They just love sitting here.
In one way, in terms of the size of this plane, the flights they would do, this would be the long-haul plane, right?
Absolutely. It was designed for that. They could stay in the air for almost 20 hours. And the military versions had extra fuel tanks in them and could go up to almost 30 hours in the air with extra crews to man them.
Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure you're watching will agree. This gentleman here, a wealth of knowledge and an incredible opportunity to catch up with you. Bob Delahunty, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Fletch, it's been fantastic having you here, and I'm sure all of our members will enjoy seeing Fletch being on the Connie, because that's pretty important to us as well.
It means a lot. Thanks, Bob. How emotional is this to be on board such a beautiful aircraft, the Constellation? We can only just imagine the thousands of people that have been on board during her time in the air, the conversations that would have taken place around the cabin area, and of course the countless destinations that this aircraft took people. And now here she sits in the hangar preserved at Shellharbour Airport at Albion Park Rail, New South Wales, Australia. Full of thoughts, full of memories, and I hope you've enjoyed this very special segment on board Connie in this week's Classic Restos.
We've always had a few cars. They're all special. The T-Bird.
Oh, that's mine.
The Combi for when we want to get away. The XR8.
It's going to be a classic.
They're all insured with Shannons,
We've also got Shannon's home and contents cover.
which helps protect our automotive collectibles, tools and memorabilia in the home and garage. If you're motoring enthusiasts like us, it's got to be.
Shannon's.
Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts. Call 13 46 46 for a quote.
They may not be making the classic Holden anymore, but the legacy lives on. You can still have a Holden certified service using genuine Holden and AC Delco quality parts at over 180 centres across Australia. Go to holden.com.au to find your nearest centre. Book your Holden in, maintain the pride. And of course, if you own a classic, it goes without saying, it just has to be insured with Shannons. Why not pick up the phone and give Shannons a call for a quote and a chat on 134646. And the Shannons Club awaits you. For more information, visit shannons.com.au. Welcome back. Well, we have something extra large still to be seen on today's show. But in the meantime, we have Jungle Bob, our restorations manager here at the airport, doing a wonderful job behind the scenes. How are you, Bob?
I'm really well, thank you, and welcome.
Thank you. You've got a great job here.
Oh, it's a dream job. Doesn't pay much, but it's a dream job.
The expertise and the knowledge you have of the old aircraft. Behind us we have a 1943 Lockheed under restoration, which is absolutely superb work. Trying to get my head around the weight of the engines. We've got a 12-cylinder Allison here behind us on each side. A lot of weight there, a lot of iron. Would have been a fast plane back in its time.
It was the Joint Strike Fighter of the 1940s in its day, right? Capable of 360 miles an hour.
Wow.
Which was fast for back then. And incredibly good range, you know. Could fly all the way from England to Germany and back.
I think it's incredible how you restore these planes, keeping in mind a lot of the aircraft here from World War II and blueprints, original designs, hard to come by now. To think that you still get World War II wreckage of planes that have landed in the jungle, I guess shrines of pieces of equipment that have been laying dormant since the Second World War, to get the right permission to extract the bodies of the aircraft out of the jungle that were used and shot down in the war. And you've got those pieces, some of them out the back there, and you use those frames and make templates, and that's how you reshape and remake most of the parts.
Yes, it's a complex job, but you start with your three-dimensional blueprint, which comes from the jungle, and then we, computer draw all the parts, the airframe completely, and then we put it through the manufacturing process.
Talk about restoration on another level. It's not the sort of restoration we stop and think about often, is it? But behind the scenes, we restore our bikes, our cars, our trucks. And while we're doing that, these guys here are doing that to World War II aircraft. This is just another thing for you to see when you visit the Shellharbour Airport here at Albion Park Rail in New South Wales. Bob, I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much, and keep up your great work. And to think that this aircraft behind us will be back up in the air one day is amazing. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Bob. Thank you.
Fletch, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. We look around here at parts, wreckage and carnage. And the reason that the gentleman inside has the name of Jungle Bob is because Bob plays an integral role of organising the salvaging, researching and finding the damaged World War II aircraft, bringing them back, replicating them, and where can, restoring them. Parts here enshrined. Not all bad stories. Nice to hear of the pilots that did survive and were saved. We can only think of what went through the minds of the pilots, in some cases with their last moments. And from what we know today, there's just nothing but respect to each and every one of these pilots that flew these aircraft back in a time of horrendous conditions. If there's one big daddy of an aircraft here at HAAS, it just has to be the 747-438 behind us. It's an emotional aircraft that has a fantastic story. It also holds a record for the longest flight and also a record for the shortest flight out of any jet this size belonging to Qantas. I have been waiting ages for this. Up close and personal with possibly one of Boeing's finest, the legendary 747, and later 747-400 long reach. The size, the enormity, they are intimidating. They dominated the skies for decades. While you may have been sitting there relaxing in this state-of-the-art 747-400, sipping your bourbon and Coke, looking out of the window, or asleep through the middle of the night over the Pacific somewhere, these jets could have been achieving near a Mach 1 speed without you even knowing. They brought people together. They brought you home. Fitted with 4 Rolls-Royce RB211 engines, this was the first Qantas 747-438, the 12th 400 produced, accepted on the 11th of August 1989 and called City of Canberra. Her official registration is Victor Hotel Oscar Juliet Alpha, and she holds the world record for the longest non-stop flight by a commercial aircraft, London to Sydney, in August of 1989, for a total time of 20 hours and 9 minutes at an average speed of 893 kilometres an hour for a total distance of 18,012 kilometres. During that flight, there were just 23 passengers and crew. The aircraft used a special blend of high-density fuel developed by Shell in Germany to enable it to fly the record distance. She held an extra 10 tonnes of fuel, increasing capacity to about 183 tonnes for the flight. In fact, before leaving Heathrow, she was towed out onto the tarmac to save fuel, and that fuel was weeping from the overflow vents. The City of Canberra was in service just over 25 years. She flew 13,833 flights, carried over 4 million passengers, and has flown nearly 85 million kilometres, almost 111 return trips to the moon. Lots of admiration here for this man, David Barnes, former pilot for Qantas. You've flown these 747s quite a bit, David, I believe.
Yes, nearly 13,000 hours flying 747s for Qantas, 4,500 767, about 1,500 737s.
Dave, this is an amazing moment for me. I never thought the day would come where I've spent many hours up there in one of these, but never down here at ground level, leaning up against one of the tyres of this incredible aircraft. It'd have to go down as one of Boeing's finest, wouldn't it?
I'd say it was one of the best aircraft they've ever built. I mean, it's a classic. It allowed mass air travel, and it's been around since the 1970s.
1,000 kilometres an hour, these things can fly at.
Oh, that's right. Your normal cruise speed's 86% of the speed of sound there, Fletch. So we got used to doing it, but I mean, it's a very fast jet, very efficient. Yeah. And initially, when you're heavy, you're burning 13 tonnes of fuel an hour. Yeah. Towards the end of the flight, about 8 tonnes. Yeah. And the aircraft's wingspan's 64.7 metres, and overall she's 70 metres. And then if you look up at the tail, that's 19.04 metres. Everything is big about this machine.
It's unbelievable. Is it true that they use about 10 tonnes of fuel to take off and get to their altitude?
Yeah, something like that, 10 to 12 tonnes. Initially, I think the fuel flow goes to 24 tonnes an hour during setting takeoff thrust.
Yep. Responsibility must be incredible. Is it a nervous thing every time you do a shift and you fly one of these, or do you get to a point in your career where you turn up and just drive it like a car?
Yeah, you turn up, and when you first fly a jumbo, it's pretty daunting, but after a while you're so used to operating the machine, you just think of going to work and flying it the best way you can, get the passengers safely from A to B and, give them a good ride. Part of our pre-flight, show you a trick of the trade, most important, gear pins have to be removed, that's the red tag. If the gear pins are still in, we cannot retract the gear on takeoff, very embarrassing. The other trick of the trade is brake wear pins, and this is how we can check we've got adequate brakes. The pin must be out past this feature here. Over on the other side, you can see there's not as much brake wear left, but it's still acceptable to take flying. We just check all the gear doors, we have a look, make sure no panels are missing. We check the wick discharges on the end of the wing, have a good look inside the engine, check all the fan blades, have a look at the back of the engine, check the turbine blades look all right, and once again make sure the engineers have locked up all the panels. Just in front of us here, we point out the auxiliary power unit. This is what we use to start the aircraft, normally sits up in the tail. Small jet engine provides electrical power and air to start the engines. Their air start motor is about 630 horsepower, runs off jet fuel.
This particular 747 has a massive bracketry system to carry a spare engine, and you might have to take one of those to Singapore. Or did every long reach have that bracket, or just this one?
They're always mounted. Boeing's always had them up there. We don't often put the actual mount on there. The bolts are fittings are actually up there. And when we want to carry a fifth pod, the engineers bolt the fitting on, and then they wind the engine up by hand, and each engine weighs about 6.5 tonnes.
At time of filming today, it was around 8 years ago when this plane did the 11-minute flight from Sydney down here, and thousands of people turned up around Albion Park Rail, very proud locals to see this jet come to their hometown, and I think that's extremely special for the area as well.
It is. I think it's a fantastic boon for the area, and it's a terrific draw card from a tourism point of view, and we're so lucky to have a jumbo here at a small regional airport. The runway here is only 1,800 metres long. It's not a normal length of runway to get a jumbo in, and the captain who brought it in was a manager training, and he did a wonderful job getting it.
Okay, Fletch, this is how we do an engine start, push back, set the park brake. Captain calls start number 4. We always start 4, then 3, and then 2 and 1 together, and the sequence is 2 packs off, get the air pressure. Captain calls start 4. First officer reaches up, pulls the switch. You get a start valve light open. Captain reaches across to run, and then we watch the auto start. After about 30-40 seconds, the engine will light off. Engine stabilises at about 23% N1 fan speed. By this stage, start 3, so up here again. Pull the start valve, start light open, captain reaches across, start 3, and then for the others, same deal, 2 and then 2 and 1 together. After start, all these are running. The APU is kicked off, or generators, so reach up, all these go to auto, come down here. Normally wouldn't have any lights, and the important one is the packs go back on so that people can breathe at 10,000 feet. When we clear the takeoff, we've done the checklist, flaps are at 20, tower says you're clear for takeoff, we've got auto throttle, alarm LNAV, VNAV. Ready for takeoff, thrust comes up to 1 inch. We come down here, all engines are stable, set thrust, push the Toga switch, auto throttle brings the power up, captain keeps his or her hand on there till V1. Call the S-speed, engines are stabilised and thrust is good. 80 knots, speed check, V1, hand comes off the thrust levers. Rotate at 170 knots for heavyweight takeoff, and then we're climbing out at 180 knots. Once we're airborne, positive rate, gear up, and then at some point we'll get to 1,000 feet. Aircraft will pitch you down to get you accelerating to 250 knots. Then we start bringing the flaps up in stages till we are what we call clean. Then after takeoff checklist.
How many years were you with Qantas?
32 years.
It's a big part of your life with the company, David.
Oh, it is. Huge chunk. I've been flying since I was 18 out at Bankstown and Air Force, and then Qantas was an absolutely half my life at the time.
Good on you, Dave. Well, thank you very much again. I'm sure that you would have, at one time or more, you would have been the pilot of this plane. When I reckon I would have been on board. I'm sure hundreds, thousands of us possibly could have been. So, yeah, I just want to thank you for your time, mate, and it's been wonderful to catch up with you.
Thanks very much, Fletch. It's always nice to tell the people about the job and how much I love flying for Qantas, and it was a wonderful career.
This is special aviation history. In addition to their pride here in maintaining aeroplanes, HAAS has a valuable social function for members and their spouses, allowing pilots and engineers to continue their love affair with aeroplanes and to interact with their compatriots long after they have moved on from active involvement with heavy aircraft. It's been a different episode this week for you, but after all, you have seen some classics and most have been restored, and they are classic Restos. How fantastic was this? The president of HAAS, Bob, we had Jungle Bob and of course David. 3 incredible guys with a mountain of experience, and they are here awaiting your visit at Shellharbour Airport, New South Wales. Featured aircraft on the episode, the 1954 Constellation known as Connie, and this record setter, the beloved 747-438. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next week, no matter where you're watching Classic Restos from, please ride and drive safe. I'm Fletch, and I thank you very much for watching.
You can like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Classic Restos TV and watch catch-up episodes at shannons.com.au.
Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons, where you can sign up to be a member of the Shannons Club, your local Holden certified service centre, Pace Farm the enjoyable egg, and Heron Forbes Machinery House, where you can buy online.